deal. He picks it up, he says grace, and he passes it out. What you don't know, all right, is take, bless, break, give. 4 imperatives. Those are imperatives, English teachers, okay? Take, bless, break, give. All right? Those 4 imperatives are the step-by-step instructions on how the high priest was to offer sacrifice in the temple. It wasn't how the ordinary person said grace. It wasn't how anybody said grace. Nobody said the meal blessing by take, bless, break, give. No. It was how the high priest offered sacrifice in the temple. So he takes, bless, break, give, gives it out to the people. They're eating it up. Okay? And then Jesus says to the boys, he says, now guys, now we got to get out of here. Why? Because I just gave them free food. All right? You're going to get free food today, okay? Most of you probably eat at least once a day. All right? And most of your lives, you eat once a day. These people, they could go for days and days with zero food whatsoever. All right? They were hungry. And if they find someone who could give them free food, it was crazy. So Jesus says, let's get out of here. Why? Because they're going to want to make me king. And I don't want to be their king. I'm not ready for that yet. I just gave, let's go. And they jumped in the boat, they rowed, they walked, they got away from the crowd. But the crowd comes looking for Jesus. We got to find this guy. He can give us free food. We got to find him. And they find him in the synagogue. And they got him kind of back in the corner there. And they say, hey, Jesus, what was that about up there? What was all that bread and stuff like that? And he says, our fathers ate manna in the desert, but the bread I will give you is my flesh for the life of the world. And they said, wow. What the heck does that mean? Jesus was always doing that, right? He was always saying these profound things and no one even knew what he was talking about. And he says, listen, my flesh is real food, my blood is real drink. What? Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. What? And in John 6:66, John chapter 6, verse 66, guess what they did? They went away from him. They walked away. He was altogether too much for them. Jesus, they're getting away. There's almost 10,000 people there. You're trying to build up the kingdom. You got all these people. They're eating out of your hands. Don't let them go. Just tell them. Tell them, Jesus, you're just kind of talking symbolically. Tell them they don't really have to eat your flesh and drink your blood. Tell them. And he just let them go. And away they went. Why didn't Jesus just tell them he was only talking about symbols and signs and stuff like that? He didn't tell them that because he couldn't. He had told them 3 times, in no uncertain terms, eat flesh, drink blood. He told them that. And he's not going to water it down. It really is his flesh and blood he wanted to eat. Everybody went away except for the 12. And Jesus looks at them and he says, well, what about you? Are you too going to go away from me? And Peter speaks for the boys and he says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words of everlasting life. In other words, Lord, we don't know what you're talking about. All right? He didn't say we understand, we get it, transubstantiation of the species, the matter of the form, and all that. They didn't get any of that. But so far, Lord, you haven't lied to us. You haven't told us anything that wasn't true. So far, everything you've said has been good for us. We're going to stick it out. Not sure what this eat flesh, drink blood stuff is all about, but we're going to stick it out. To whom shall we go, Lord? You alone have the words of everlasting life. They stick with it. Can you imagine going around with Jesus after that? Can you imagine the next day about lunchtime? Guys, you hungry? Want to stop for lunch? What do we have? Eat flesh, drink blood. What are we going to have? So they're watching him. They're watching him from then on. Sure enough, wasn't much longer after that, they were having their big special Passover, right? That they've been doing for thousands of years, every year. Right? And there in the upper room, he does something that's not part of Passover. He does a bunch of things that are not part of Passover. But at the meal, what does he do? He takes the bread, says the blessing, breaks the bread, and gives it to them. Uh-oh. He's doing it again. And you better believe they were paying attention. And then he says it. He says the words, "This is my body. This is my blood." All right? Take and eat. This is my body. No, Jesus, that's bread. No, I didn't stutter. I don't lie. This is my body. And he says, when he says, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man, and then he says, take and eat, that verb to eat. People who listen to me a lot know that I really am incredibly disappointed with 21st century American English. Unfortunately, it's the only language I can speak, so I have to use it. All right. But it is so absolutely inadequate for so many things. Right? It's so inadequate. We only have one verb that we use commonly. When we say to eat, most languages have two verbs to distinguish. Right? I know little. Sie sprechen Deutsch, ja. Sie sprechen Deutsch, ja. Ja, du sprichst Deutsch. Spricht jemand noch Deutsch? You already heard this. You know the answer. You might know too. Was bedeutet Essen auf Deutsch? Eat, right? Was bedeutet fressen? It's the way that an animal eats another animal. It's gnaw, chew, and all that, okay? In all of Scripture, when they say to eat, they use the Hebrew word that means like eating. The word Jesus chooses for this particular one, though, he chooses the Hebrew word that means fressen, that means chew, gnaw, like flesh and blood. All right? Take and eat. Wow. And then he says, and then he adds, do this in memory of me. When you do this, remember me. That's something else you all got to know. If you're going to be bringing young people to Mass, if you're going to be going yourselves, when you go to Mass, that word remember, that's another terrible 21st century American English corruption. All right? In the first century, in actually most cultures in the Middle East, and of course we don't know what was going on around the world, but at least in Middle Eastern cultures, which would be the Jews and the Arabs and the Greeks and some of the Romans, okay? The Greek word memoriale, remember, all right? For us, 21st century American speakers, we use that word remember, and it means, oh yeah, I think about it. I call it to mind. It comes into my brain, okay? In the first century, when a Middle Eastern person said memoriale, it didn't just mean call it to mind. It means that a past event actually becomes present. If you think about Eastern philosophies and things in your brain become actually present to you, they're not just thoughts in your mind, okay? It isn't take it and bring it to mind. It's take a past event and bring it to presence, okay? So, too much. When I have college kids, I always pick on someone's mother. Oh, you're a mother? Dr. Weiss, do you remember the day? Do you remember the day that your David was born?
I do.
She does, right? And she could tell us all about that day. And she would smile maybe, and she'd tell it was raining, or it was snowing, or it was dark, or it was bright, or whatever. And she'd tell all the things. She'd call it to mind, and to help us to put it in our minds. All right? In the first century, if I had used that verb to remember, and said, please remember the day David was born. Oh, don't make me do that. She'd have to lay down on the floor and roll around and wail in pain, and it would be nasty, and she'd probably curse real loud and all those kind of things, and make a fool of herself, because she's not trying to take a past event and bring it to mind. She has to make a past event and and make it present. So that that same event could be actually present to us. Not just in our minds. And so when Jesus says, when you do this, remember me, he doesn't just say, when you do this, yeah, think about me. You know, this is my body. I'm thinking about you. No. He's making a past event present. And making us present that past event. And so what's going on at Mass? Went to a conference one time and started out. And the priest was he was kind of a ham. And he says, and he and I get presentations of ham and turkey. And anyways, he comes out and he walks out and says, do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that Mass is showing you? Do you know? But his premise was that when we're at Mass, we're in a whole lot of places. We're not just remembering that we're actually there. We are, first of all, in traditional churches, what happens is the priest comes in and he goes up and up. And in fact, for about 1,800 years, they went really up. Okay? Up and up and up. All right? Now with cost engineering and all of that of building, they don't go up so much. Okay? But up and up and up. Where's it going? You're actually at the upper room when Jesus says, take this, this is my body. You're actually there in the upper room. Guess where else you are? Where else do they go up and up and up? The cross. You're actually there at the sacrifice of Calvary. What else is up and up and up? And an awful lot of churches in the old world, and here in town at St. Joe's, the cathedral, at St. Mark's, all right? When you go in, the ceilings are decorated. They're painted amazingly. All right? Why? Who cares about this? Just a stupid ceiling. Because it's important that as soon as you walk through the door, you see what's in front of you. And the architecture, it's solid. Gothic architecture, it's solid. And then it gets fine. And because you see what's before you, then it causes you to look up. It draws you up. In the upper room, up on Calvary, up to the glories of heaven. He says, do this and remember me. Don't fast forward a whole lot. Oh, I can't fast forward that much. Very shortly after Jesus says, do this and remember me, they started doing this. He had done it for them in the hillside. He did it in the upper room. The day after the resurrection, he's doing it on the road to Emmaus. A week later after the resurrection, you know where he did it again? A week later? A week after the resurrection, the boys are out fishing. And Jesus comes down to the edge of the sea and he says, catch you anything? You been fishing before? Don't you think it's ignorant when people walk up and say, are you catching anything? I was until you scared all the fish away. You yell at me like that. You catching anything? No, have caught a bite. He says, try the other side of the boat. Go ahead, all this stuff. And Peter looks up and he says, it's the Lord. It's Jesus. And he jumps in the lake to swim to shore. First of all, he gets dressed. Usually you actually take things off to jump in the lake, but he did the opposite. He got dressed. He jumped in the lake. He swam to shore. It didn't do him any good. Now that's a whole different talk, why he swam to shore so fast. Okay, that's an awesome talk about mercy. It's amazing. Okay? But the boat gets there at the same time, so he just got wet for nothing. Okay? And when they all get to shore, there's Jesus with a little fire going, a little grill going there, and he's cooking breakfast for them. What's he got for breakfast? Fish and bread. Lord, it's you. Oh, wow, yeah. He says, let's have breakfast. I'll say the prayer. What's he do? He takes the bread, says the blessing, breaks the bread, and gives it to him again. After seeing this, and then that, do this in remembrance of me, they started to remember, maybe he really wants us to do this. And what they started doing in the beginning is they would get together, they would go back to that upper room. That upper room, the safe place. And they would do this. They would take the bread, say the blessing, break it, give it out. And they knew that Jesus was there when they did that. It was Jesus. Not just a reminder, but he was really there. And they were really there at the cross with him. They were really there in the upper room. They were really there in heaven with him. They were really there with him. Well, as time went on, that upper room, it started to get cramped. You know? And they say, hey, some of us, it's kind of tight in here. Some of us, let's go over to Carly's house. So one of the leaders would take a half of them over to Carly's house. And they would start going to people's houses as the crowds grew and grew and grew. And as the church grew and went to Rome, in Rome they were being persecuted terribly. And if we went to Carly's house then, the Roman people would bust in and tear you out, maybe feed you to lions, some kind of torture, at least tell you to stop that. You know? You get in big trouble. Big trouble. So they started hiding in catacombs and doing this, take, bless, break, give, in catacombs. And as time went on, there was an emperor, Constantine. Constantine, he was an emperor. He had a problem, though. Emperors are supposed to persecute Christians. That's what he learned. That's just what we do. But he has another problem. His mother has become a Christian. And emperors are supposed to love their mothers. What will I do? Well, he started to see the joy that was coming over her mother, the transformation that was going on in her life, the things that she was teaching him and telling him. He started to say, you know what? These Christian people, they're not all that bad. And so he signed the decree, the Edict of Milan. And by this decree, it was no longer illegal for Christianity Christianity was no longer illegal in the empire with that edict. And in fact, he says, you know, the leader of these Christians, I want to meet with the leader of them. Who's the leader? And his advisors say, well, there's a fellow that they call him Papa. They call him Papa. He's the leader. Well, go find this Papa character, and I want to talk with him. Pope comes before Constantine. Constantine, you guys are wonderful. I'm sorry we persecuted you, and we want to give you something. Do you want gold, jewels, whatever? No, we can't use any of that. How about money? Now, we don't really need a lot of money. St. Mark's does need money, by the way, okay? But in the first century, they provided in other ways. Other ways of providing, okay? Because they didn't have to pay a bill, and tax bill, and diocesan assessments, and insurance, and all that stuff, okay? But we do. Anyways, well, what can I give you? You know what? Here in the 3rd century, they had just discovered this new type of architecture called basilique. And basilique allowed them to have a big, wide open room without having to have walls to hold the ceiling up. Okay? And he says, we kind of went a little crazy and built too many of these things. And they were used for halls of justice. But because they weren't persecuting people like they used to, they didn't need so many halls of justice anymore. Okay? And God said, would you like one of our buildings? I have one here on Lateran Hill you can have. And the Pope says, yeah, that might be nice for our meetings. You know, we won't have to hide in the catacombs and stuff like that. Well, the point is, as we read even the secular history of the times, this isn't church history, this is secular history, history written down by historians, we see that what they did has remained constant. For 2,000 years, it's remained constant. They would all gather together, whether it was in someone's house, in the upper room, and they'd greet each other. Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Okay? And they would, but instead of greeting, what was the 1st century greeting for a Christian? The Lord be with you.